name is Ali Belzer. I am a licensed professional counselor, a specialist in experiential education, and a clinical adventure therapist.
My name is Amanda Reedy, a licensed clinical social worker working as a mental health therapist. We believe therapy is a great tool for healing. However, we want to demystify what healing can look like, as in our experience, people care for themselves in creative, intuitive, and determined ways.
Each episode, we will get curious about healing that is outside traditional talk therapy and deconstruct how healing can be a practice that is innate to who we are. Just as singing is to birds and making honey is to bees, it's just what we do. Let's get it.
Hi, everybody. This is my sister, Amanda, and also a therapist and co-host of the podcast. And Amanda, these are Jackie and Clara. They were Prescott students too. Did you both graduate?
Yes.
Congratulations to all three of you. You made
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, and Jackie and Clara studied wheel therapy as their capstone, and I think that's kind of what we're here to dive into today. Jackie and Clara, do you just want to introduce yourselves and kind of what you're doing now?
I'm Jackie. I just graduated with my EDS in experiential counseling and master's in counseling. And so I'm working in community mental health right now, working with youth and families. And Claren and I have been working on this wheel therapy project, trying to develop an adventure therapy program that uses wheels as a therapeutic tool. And it's all in process, and we're excited to be here to talk about it today.
Yes. I loved working on the wheel therapy project because it feels like this convergence of all of my lifelong passions, ceramics and biking and any wheel. Just kind of the convergence of all of those parts of us. And this is kind of one of those things times a million. Yeah.
So what is wheel therapy? What does that look like? How did the idea come to you? What does it mean to both of you?
For me, wheel therapy is that process of getting to know yourself and then getting a little farther from there than you're comfortable with, and then kind of negotiating that again. And you can do that with metaphor, a tool, a person, a community member, just in an individual way. There's just so many ways of kind of incorporating your whole self to a whole world. Yeah. Kind of appreciating all the parts.
Yeah, so like that metaphor of circles and wheels, and that we're holistic beings, that applies to activities that have wheels, like ceramics or biking or skating. So I think that, and other wheeled activities as well. I think that Clara and I, our interests in biking and skating, those kinds of activities, and doing them ourselves recreationally, bringing that to a therapy context is kind of the idea of wheel therapy, and allowing people to choose their own adventures. So we have this in-process model with curriculum tracks where people will be able to choose what kind of wheels they want to work with. And the curriculum also relates back to wheels as metaphors, and how people can make their own metaphors as they're participating in different experiential processes.
Yeah. It sounds like pretty wide scope of sure, we're working with physical wheels, but then wheel as a metaphor for a wholeness or a completeness or full circle moments. And you tell me if I'm getting this right, connecting with that concept of forward motion and completeness by interacting with literal circles.
Yeah.
Did I summarize that okay?
Yeah.
And I think there's an embodied metaphor even in what you said, right? I heard forward motion, right? That there's this development going towards it.
Yeah. And then by moving away from a specific type of recreation or modality, the concept of the wheel is so easily flexible and applied to different seasons of life, different activities, and different ways of thinking. We always kind of start with this question, especially with people who we interview who are clearly thinking so creatively about therapy and what it can be. Just like wondering if you can share kind of your personal connection, your relationship to therapy, and almost like specifically therapy as a word. How have you connected with the word therapy? What has that meant to you, like historically and now as you do your own work as mental health therapists?
That word has so many seasons and textures to it throughout my life. And it's a very curious thing. I think I'm a very sensation based person. So the recognition that there's an activity that I do that is therapy is extremely therapeutic. Yeah. And that's a big transition because there's a lot of being off the mark and kind of negotiating. Is this therapy?
I think, yeah, the thinking of the word therapy, it has a lot of different meanings to me. And then we have our clinical context of working with clients and, the how it's like a health service that you could get. So there's that piece. And then there's just this broader sense of things that I do throughout my day that feel therapeutic, or you could say my own therapy. And the way I think of the way that I connect, and a lot of that is through nature, through activities that make me feel regulated. And I think as I'm just at the beginning of my therapist journey, I feel like there's a lot, this word becomes more broad. Like there's more, I'm constantly like redefining what that means to me. So it feels somewhat unknown and also known.
Feel really grateful to have a new way to describe a way of being. Claire, when you said I'm a really sensation-based person, I think that's why traditional talk therapy doesn't feel magical for a lot of folks, is because external verbal processing doesn't hit as hard for folks, especially who are sensation processors. And if you're a sensation-based person, we need therapy can and should be an activity that alters the sensation in your body and then calls you to notice it.
Yeah. Yeah. That noticing of that difference can be so subtle in some organizers of your experience rather than others. And I think that's highlighted when you are on wheels in some way, because you are given this feedback outside of yourself almost immediately, that bump in the ground, or the thing isn't centered like on the wheel, like you can feel it bouncing and giving you feedback to this hand, push harder, make you look at it differently. So there is kind of this visual reprocessing in the moment, and then to travel with that thread and kind of stitch it back into what's this look like in your mundane life, when we're not doing all these things that require all of our attention. So it's really a lot of like food for thought.
Yeah, I also liked how, Jackie, you mentioned, as I'm actually participate as a professional in this field, that's when my definition of therapy got bigger, like way more complicated. Whereas I think like in traditional counseling education, people have attempted to put therapy in a box so that it's billable and treatable and diagnosable and practicable. And like this has been so true with almost every like helping professional that we've met, is that no, actually once I started interacting with humans, like it got so much bigger than like what the books defined therapy as.
Yeah, it's like I struggle with fitting it into the medical model, and that's, you're kind of in that system, and you're also yourself, self of the therapist, providing services from your own self. So it's kind of an integration of those pieces, I think.
Like where we started diving more into like client-centered and relationship-centered work, that relationship got circular. It was not linear. The more we've dove into what humanness can add to counseling, that's what made it round. Does that make sense? That's what hit me.
I like that image. And it kind of aligns with my, like, one of the assessment models that I've come up with. I created, like, a star. And from the inside out, you're kind of like this star reaching out to the environment. And should you touch the rim, you'd probably feel quite connected. And from the outside in, you might feel the environment touching you to the core. But should you let that feeling, be complete? Yeah, there's like a way of kind of seeing like, oh, that one sticks out, and I can smooth it out if I strengthen my other parts, if I feel a little more whole. How do we get there?
Like if all elements of your life are reaching through this spoke or this beam, like that wheel is like not actually supported enough to elicit motion.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
It's an interesting model because all of us are a little out of true, and you get used to kind of like wobbling and putting your weight in that way.
What have been some shifts that you felt either personally or that you've seen with your work with clients that often come from this modality of wheel therapy? What have been some of the more, I don't know, memorable or powerful moments that you've noticed?
I have a lot of clients who end up like drawing out, this is what's happening to me, and this is the painful part, or they'll say, this is the part of me I really like. And then they'll kind of go out another layer and say, here's the system for me. Here's how the system impacts that and makes it easier or harder. Like kind of in these circles that come concentrically outward. So you can kind of create these layers of support and kind of acknowledgement in that way.
I think it's like present moment contact, which is like kind of the idea with adventure therapy and experiential stuff. Like, here we are in the moment and what's coming up and how do we get from here to there. And so a lot of what I feel like comes up with clients is like finding language to describe those experiences and then figuring out what activity is going to help draw that out and help people have more language to describe what they're actually feeling. And I think thinking of those as threads that are kind of unraveling and becoming as you work within the container of the therapeutic relationship.
I think of the picture cards. There's like climber cards, and then there's like Shiji cards. Have you seen these? They're just like kind of random drawings and images on a deck of cards. And so often, like if someone is stuck in the meaning making process in therapy, what can be so helpful is like just draw a card and tell me how that is applicable to what you're going through. And I feel like the concept of wheels, I feel like that's a really good touch point to help clients make meaning of what they're doing in therapy. How does this connect to like the circle of your being? Or like Clara said, like, how does this return feel? Like we've been in this loop before. What's different now? Like you have a really good channel into understanding and meaning making.
Yeah, if you have a card that can symbolically represent something within, oh, that's me, and then now we're both looking at it, and that's an experience in itself. I remember Jackie and I were both at the Horse Sense of Carolina's intensive. Well, why would you do any kind of groundwork around horses? I guess because like these are these huge animals that do elicit big feelings out of people or fear responses. So, okay, what are we going to do with that, with like this new experience, which feels a lot more obvious that you're having this response than to a bike. It was very interesting to just see how grounding made a very big difference in just like approaching the horses and how the horses saw us. And there was this moment where it was like, this is our energy, right? Okay, that's our wheel. We're holding this. And then kind of moving that around to help this person regulate, right? I thought that was a really like interesting approach to collaborating in therapy.
I like the parallel between horses and bikes. It's obvious for so many people because horses can be scary, and people are invited to kind of notice what's happening for them when they're in front of like such a big animal. And then you said something, how does that apply to a bike? And then I noticed what was happening in my body is I would have a much stronger reaction if I was going on a group bike ride than I would if I were to ride a horse. Not that I'm good at horse riding, but I'm realizing, oh, I have really self-limiting beliefs around I am or am not a person who rides bikes.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, yeah, what would the invitation be if I were with you for myself to say, because if I drop into my body, I'm scared of embarrassment around people who are bikers. Like I have an identity around not being a bike person. I have a fear of discomfort, I think, around bike riding. Yeah, I'm just wondering, how would you take or what would the invitation be for me if that's what you noticed or invited me to check in with if we were doing some kind of like wheel therapy session?
Well, I feel like you are the reason that wheel therapy exists.
Mm-hmm.
Like alone, like that feeling is very familiar to me
Mm-hmm.
and so many people. I don't belong here because I'm not an athlete,
Mm-hmm.
because I had like a limiting experience that like now I don't think I would belong there. The people who show up there are confident and
Mm-hmm.
kind of developing. So we're actually not going to get on a bike or do anything to challenge that belief until you're ready. There's stuff that we can do beforehand. There are alternative wheels. We can play with balls. We can get goofy with ourselves and find kind of that mutual language. It would look really kind of different depending on the context and how it starts to unfold for you. But I would be curious, is a group ride even the goal
Mm-hmm.
as a wheel therapy program? And they can have access to partnerships so that you go to a bike shop and you don't feel that lingering sense of I'm not even supposed to be here.
Yeah, that is a feeling when I think of like me going to a bike shop
Right.
or.
My hope is kind of creating more opportunities for people to do that without the kind of the risk of being associated with anything, because yeah, you're doing this for you, and then once you're finally on a bike, I'd be curious, like, are any of those feelings remaining?
I keep coming back to like the removal of like the linear idea of what therapy is, that it's clinician and client or current state of being to potential state of being, that like we set goals in this very linear way or are asked to. And I'm hearing like the way you talk about like concentric action around a desired thing or around like a growth edge or anything, like that feels so much more inviting to like spiral around the thing that you're leaning toward or that you want to be a part of, that you're experiencing obstacles to. Like
Perspective shifter.
yeah, and I'm just like, oh, we can just stop facing each other, stop facing the direct thing that scares you, like Manda, to be on a bike in front of people. Like that's so confrontational. So like any
Oh,
way
yeah.
you can put yourself next to and look at the middle, but like you're still in motion as you interact with the thing you're struggling with. So great, so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many. I mean, you just make me think about the senses. There are not five, there are many, many more. And so, kind of that like inside sense of being here and being present and not being like fluttered with butterflies or whatever the feeling is, kind of just like having that ability. I've been thinking a lot about like that witness, that voice or emphasis on your experience in the present moment, saying, hey, did you want to be here? You know, or validating that you wanted to be here, which is very cool, but seldom happens. So there's kind of more of a misalignment and letting you know when things aren't working than when things are working. And I think that's great information. So I'm just inviting a space where someone can say that out loud and find a way to, explore with curiosity.
I was just going to add about another idea or intervention that wheel therapy could be, especially if people aren't comfortable writing or, start with learning about the wheeled activity that they're going to participate in. You can do like an internal family systems parts work
Yeah.
idea with the parts of the bike or the parts of the skate, and compare that to yourself and think about what parts you need to participate and what parts of of the activity are going to be coming up. So that can be a good starting place too for people.
I think, Ali, you and I, we are now committed to doing the experience, right? So we are talking with all these folks about experiential therapy, or what's healing or what's therapeutic for them. And then we're actually going to participate in them rather than just talk about them. But this will be interesting, Ali, if you and I actually do a bike ride and we are coming from very different emotional places when it comes to bike riding. And sometimes I get in a really comfortable place where I think I have a lot of security in who I am, and I have a really strong sense of self. And sometimes I realize that it's because I am not pushing myself to a growth edge, and I feel really sure of myself because I haven't moved out of where I feel really sure of myself.
And you know that.
Yeah, I'm noticing it right now because I haven't experienced feelings of like embarrassment or my cheeks feeling red if I were to walk in alone to like Boise Bike Project, be like, can you teach me about a bike? You know, like it makes me feel very young. It makes me feel like I'm going to be like, they're going to have a certain perspective of me. And I'm like, wow, these are young and old feelings for me, because I think I've put myself in places where I don't have to feel this because I've created a life where I'm not in a place where I'm struggling very much. But the more and more that we're talking to folks about experiential therapy and work, is that the edge of the human experience is where the juiciness is, like all the best things are, and that we need to be on the edge of discomfort, not way past it where we're to the point of overwhelm. That in the growth zone is definitely where I'm like, where I thought I had unburdened these parts of embarrassment or fear of rejection, or that I'm going to look stupid. So I don't know, Ali, you and I think would have very different starting points when we do the experiential of let's go for a bike ride.
Well, and I think that is nice because I think that could so easily feel like I'm ahead of you if we like deconstruct the linear thinking of doing an action or like being on the path to completing an action. Like we're both in the spiral, just like circling the thing, especially if the thing is doing something together that we have different experience with, but we can like circle around that together. And like I can teach you about bikes before getting on. We can practice with, like Claire said, like other circles. We can like deconstruct the bike itself as a metaphor. And like, I don't know, it's such a broader view of how I'm seeing this activity, because I think maybe before this interview, Manda, I would say like, yeah, it's not for you. Like that's not how you're gonna like connect with yourself. And I'm like, no, it could absolutely bring you closer to yourself. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Probably more so because it'll help me
Get you a little
hold the
uncomfy.
parts that, yeah. And I'm allowed to be bad at things, or I am allowed to be last, or I'm allowed to feel uncomfortable, and I can tolerate the distress of that.
I've been reframing last as the ultimate.
What does that mean to you? Yeah.
The ultimate time, the last time. It just, you know, it feels a little more like I get to choose. This one's big. This one I choose. The last time, the ultimate time. And it also invites you to kind of be more like present in the like, I choose the parameters here, right? Like even if there's an experience that you're taking into your new bike ride, it's still like something you actively have to carry with you and like keep it alive in a way. And it's nice to dance with both of those bodies, right? Like the one that's lingering while you're actively using one that can't be doing that right now, that has to focus. That awareness of both is really incredible.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked a little bit about how flexible and accessible wheel therapy is. It sounds like it's a huge scope. It's like the deeper you dive into wheel therapy, the more options like are available to you to get close to yourself. So where would you recommend people start to kind of begin engaging with wheel therapy in their daily lives, like both individually and maybe professionally.
Something that came up for me, because knowing full well that both of y'all are going to want to go experience wheel therapy, I should provide you both with like a Boise specific curriculum.
Ooh.
Like for a bike ride, a rollerblade route, and like a ceramics experience and like going on a walk. And like if you know places already, then you take that off the table for me, but then we'll just come up with some like thinking questions, like something for you to take with you. Cuz honestly, like that's all one can do. Now that you've elected a wheel, a mode, recognize what comes up for you. Take it easier or slower than you normally would. That's how mindfulness can be invited in, right? And then report back.
So kind of starting with the community, like, and if you don't know what those resources are, finding support for that. Like we're trying to get a group running eventually, but we hope that we'll be able to connect people to those community resources, whether it's a bike or skating group or, the ceramic studio, so people can being a part of those activities or just getting information too. And I think some of these pieces about the somatic engagement and nature, like all of those things can be brought into a personal or professional setting, and just kind of even bringing the wheel metaphor to life and considering that for yourself. That might be another starting point too.
We have two phrases that we say a lot. Well, one that we say more often. You have to be off the mark to find it.
Yeah, just making sure I'm understanding. You have to be off the mark to find it. I picture the mark as like the bullseye in a target of like, you can't be directly at the thing you're doing in order to see like what surrounds it.
Yeah, you'd have to literally step back to be like, oh, right there, huh?
Okay. Yeah.
As intended.
And I think in therapy, like traditional therapy, there's like this, it's very kind of medicalized. Like you have a problem, let's fix your problem. And this whole, I think a lot of therapists and this whole wheel model too is just about that, like that uncomfortable place of not knowing or being off the mark. That's kind of it's actually the right place, because it's in that middle ground, and that reminds me of the window of tolerance too, and kind of living in that space of non-absolutes.
And what a courageous human being to have wandered so far from a spot and to have this perspective and make their way back home however they choose.
Yeah, I feel like there's like glass shattered for me a little bit. So I'm gonna start seeing circles everywhere, like wheels everywhere. Everything is a circle now.
That's a mood.
Is there any resources we can be handing people that are maybe listening to the podcast where they could get started in this? You said you have a few like starting thinking questions for people, or if you have like any resources that are physically available, like a curriculum or a
handout,
journal prompt,
resource.
whatever.
Yeah.
We're not terribly guarded of our materials. We do believe that like this is better if other people know and access it and things like that. And I would love to like, if with Jackie, just like come up with a little sheet of like take yourself out on a wheel, and so you guys can go and use that. How does that sound?
That sounds wonderful.
And give you a chance to wheel it out for yourself
Wheel it
at your
out.
own time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm feeling all of the wheels within right now too. I think this is where the pathologized model makes us feel like this happened, and then linearly we don't feel this because life is on a line, and it's not, it's a circle. It's even things where I thought I had moved out of is like, oh, we're here again. And I love the metaphor. And like, what do I know now as I meet this part of me again on this wheel of time, that on this next loop, we can do it much differently because I have so many more resources to hold the parts of me that feel that feel a little excited / scared of this process. So Ali and I will be very much looking forward to doing this together. And our motto for this whole podcast is therapy is anything that keeps you close to yourself, your body, your feelings, and each other. So we always end by saying, stay close. Thank you so much for your time. And if you think of anything else that you want to send our way, we'll be looking forward to absorbing it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Same here. Thanks for your time. And I'm excited for, doing some wheel therapy someday with y'all and learning what it is, the magic that you all bring into the office. I'm sure that's coming from a place of doing therapy differently.
Thanks so much for listening to That's My Therapy. As a general disclaimer, the topics discussed in this podcast are just one unique perspective, not prescriptive mental health advice. May you find healing where it finds you.
If you are feeling suicidal or in need of immediate help, you can reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988.
Is edible. Did I say that?
According to my toddler, that is true. It's at least trying.
Yeah. Rocks are delicious.
Is it a rock?
Both. Okay.